Ambassador Carter has had the honor to serve at the very highest levels of the U.S. government, including the White House, U.S. Senate, and Departments of Defense, DoD, and State, DOS. His career began in the U.S. Air Force as an instructor, evaluator pilot, and commanded numerous priority worldwide airlift and special operations missions. Separating from active duty after 10 years, he staffed Senate Leader Bob Dole as a national security advisor and subsequently performed duties at DoD as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Further subsequent government service included the Columbia Accident Investigation Board and the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad, Iraq. Throughout those years and between tours of federal service, he successfully led two separate government relations firms for over 5 years each. Later during his consulting career, Tom also flew commercially, and this experience combined with his continued Air Force Reserve service resulted in achieving 10,000 flight hours. He retired from the Reserve after 34 years at the rank of Major General. In 2017, he was nominated and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the U.S. representative to the Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization with the rank of ambassador. In this capacity, he represented the United States on all international aviation issues within the United Nations from 2017 to 2020. Tom is a graduate of both the University of Memphis. Great football game this past weekend, by the way. Again, y'all are looking good this year. Looking really good. And Georgetown University. He is married to Mary Graham and lives in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. He presently serves on the Low Country Red Cross Board of Directors. Ambassador Carter, thank you so much for joining the show.
Great. Thanks for having me, Cameron.
Glad to have you on. Glad to take this conversation down a number of different paths. We had the honor of meeting you a couple of weeks ago at breakfast, and it was a great initial conversation. I was like, I think this is a great opportunity to get you on to discuss a number of things from your prior service to your experiences in the military, and also what you're currently doing with the Red Cross, which I'm very excited about diving into as well. So I'm going to kind of start here, and I typically would leave a conversation like this towards the end of the conversation, just to basically lead up to it. But it's one of the most intriguing things about everything we've discussed up to this point. But you served as a military aide to President Ronald Reagan, and during that experience, you did some incredible things. But I'm going to let you take it away and maybe explain to the audience what a military aide to a president actually does, and explain some of those experiences that you had along the way.
Sure. Well, it has a lot of mystery associated, what's called carrying the football. And I oftentimes say it was really kind of interesting because I got to carry the football for the Gipper. And but the military aide of the president, there is a military officer around the president or nearby 24/7, 365. And their basic function is they're really, besides carrying the famous football, you're really an emergency actions officer. The military assets that support the president are enormous. People have no idea, whether it's communicators, medics, helicopters, airplanes, vehicles. All of these assets basically report to the White House Military Office. And so on any given day, the military aide that is on duty with the president is basically the point person for all those assets. And a lot of those assets play into emergency actions, not the least of which was to evacuate the president, rendezvous with it's called the Doomsday plane. It's a 747 with a battle staff, but we are the person that say magic words to make helicopters appear that are on alert, go rendezvous, but to protect and escape the president and the first lady. And so you sleep in the White House. When you're on the road, you're in the room next door typically because you have the secure phones. Now they've even got secure cell phones, I think now, but in the past when I was there, the secure devices were a lot larger, but even in a hotel or whatever, we'd be in the very next room, so that if the president had to take a secure call, they'd come to our room. And then that happened several times, but it was just I just tell people, and I believe I told you when I met you, I will never have more responsibility in my entire life than the 2 years I did that. I can't really tell you how, intricate some of the coordination is because I'm sure it's all still heavily classified.
Right.
And believe it or not, I signed myself out of 22 code word programs when I left the White House. And I swore I'd never talk about those things for fear of going to Fort Leavenworth.
Right.
And so,
So I won't
but
dive too deep. I won't ask me too many questions on that side of things.
it's okay. But basically, we work hand in glove with the Secret Service. The Secret Service, have the physical protection, and then we have the national security responsibility to keep the president as the commander in chief, no matter where he is, what vehicle he is on, what motorcade he's in. And when he is on a trip, typically, say he's coming to Charleston, if I'm the duty aide that's going to be here, I would have come the week before. We would figure out exactly where he's going to go, what he's going to do, and then a day or two before, I come back in here and with the agents and everybody and the advanced teams, and we run the routes. We go to the hospitals because they basically create their own telephone and radio network,
Right.
independent of everything else. We're going to be able to communicate because that's the biggest thing is to communicate. And literally the night before, we sit down and we go, if something happens at the airport, this is what we're doing. If something happens in the motorcade, this is what we're doing. At the event site, and we have it down to the Nats posterior exactly what we're going to do. And so then another military aide flies in and passes you the football, basically at the airplane, at least in my day. And so there's always, we always want to have two of us in case somebody goes down.
Right.
But so one is kind of staying hidden. And so, but it's a the responsibility. The best thing about the job was our relationship with the president, and
Right.
he was an amazing guy. He was very comfortable in his own skin, and he really respected us and treated us really well, and particularly at the ranch, because the ranch is up on top of a mountain northwest of Santa Barbara, and nobody went up there with them except the doctor and the military aide. And so every day you had to tack your own horse. You had to take care of it, and the president would come up and he'd tack her horse and his horse and three agents and myself, and he'd ring this little bell, and Mrs. Reagan would come up, and off we go. And we rode. It wasn't just walking. They were both very accomplished riders, and you had to know how to ride. And luckily, I took some lessons and was able to keep up with them. But I mean, the president would look back and go, "Well, is everybody ready to go?" And we go, "Yes, sir." And off we'd go. So it was that's where we had our most direct contact with him because we were everything up there:
Right.
mailman, paper boy, bill signer. We'd take a piece of legislation, say, "Here, Mr. President, this pen sign Ronald, with this pen sign Reagan," and then you collect them and everything else and send them back down. And now the agents, shift work in and out, but it's a very precarious road up to the ranch. But it was, he made it so easy. I was with him the day he was reelected, the day he was reinaugurated, and I just can't say enough about him as an individual. And if you haven't seen the movie, the latest movie with Dennis Quaid playing him, I thought it was very well done. I don't know if there ever was a KGB agent, that was tracking him. I wouldn't doubt it. But Quaid captured him pretty well, and the pictures of riding at the ranch just brought back so many memories. But it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I don't know. Well, I mean, it's a guess. The Air Force sent over six people before me. They interviewed them all. They didn't select any of them, and they went back and threw a couple of us back in there, and somehow I got selected. But it was an amazing 2 years. He was an amazing man. Anytime now, people still say the president. I think of President Reagan, but he was
Right.
just so down to earth. And I'll just tell you, he was happiest when we were at that ranch.
So you mentioned before too that you didn't have any experience riding horses before. You did have some experience riding horses prior to this.
I had ridden horses, but
Right.
actually in the interview, they said, "Do you ride horses?" And I
Yeah.
said, "No, not commonly they said, "Well, are you afraid of horses?" I said, "No, I'm not afraid of horses. I spent, summers with my grandfather with, cows and pigs and things like that. We weren't wealthy enough to have any horses, but no, I said I've ridden a horse before. But that's part of the gig. You had to, and so we went to Fort Myer to learn how to tack the horse, and then luckily the Marine Corps base at Quantico had riding stables, and so we went down and learned to ride, and so you had to get kind of comfortable with that. And but the funny thing is today I still enjoy riding. And I only do it once a year. I go out to Wyoming to this one ranch that allow you to go fast. It's the only ranch out there that you sign a waiver that you're not going to sue them if you come off a horse.
Yeah.
And Lord willing, I'm going to be there next week.
Fantastic.
A week from now. I've never been in the fall. We want to, get out there and just see what it's like in the fall. We normally go in the middle of the summer, but it didn't work out this year with the family. But I still enjoy riding horses. And the coolest thing is the very first day I met him in the Oval Office, the first thing he gives you is his personal belt buckle. And it's my most treasured thing he ever gave me because he only gave the belt buckle to people who rode with him.
Wow.
And my
Wow.
kids know that if anything ever happens to me, grab that belt
Grab the
buckle.
belt buckle. Absolutely. Did
Yeah.
you, when it came to being selected to, you mentioned you put your name in the hat. Was this something that you had been working towards, or is this more so an assignment that came up and they asked you to interview for?
I didn't apply for it.
Okay.
I had a completely different assignment. I was stationed in Southern California. I was going to Alabama to an intermediate service school called Air Command and Staff College, and I've actually one night I'm out giving a lead check in a formation to a guy, and one of the senior colonels of the base calls me on the radio, and he says, "Hey, Tom, give me a call when you get in." I said, "Okay, sir. Is anything wrong?" He goes, "No, no. It looks like you need to go do a job interview for a job." I said, "Well, sir, I've got a job assignment." He goes, "No, I think you want to interview for this one." And no, they picked me as a candidate to interview. It's a total mystery to me how it happened. But I've been lucky to be early promoted to major. I was still a captain in
Right.
'03, but I had been a deep select for major. And the other gentleman who interviewed with me was also a deep select. And so we knew each other actually. And so I jokingly said he was a fighter pilot, little shorter than me. And I jokingly say the reason I got the job is because I could hold the first lady's laundry up without it hitting the ground. Probably couldn't, and but that was my big joke with him. But
Yeah.
it's a mystery, and quite frankly, when you go to the White House, you're going to have this interview with the head of the military office, but you sit down with the existing military aides at the time before going in there, and I think that's the real interview. That's because they've got to figure out all of you. There were four of us then. There's six of them now. You all have to operate as the same unit.
Right.
You have to have such standardization the way you react and act in the White House and on the road and stuff. And so I think it really comes down to the other military aides pick somebody and go, "Hey, to the director, this is the one we think we can get along with." And so, I think the best thing is to go into an environment like that and don't talk about yourself
Yeah.
and let's just answer questions and ask them, use your best Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people techniques. And as you know, when you get other people talking about themselves, they'll go, "Wow, that was a great conversation."
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that is kind of the important part is to have people on that have the ability to talk about their experiences, right? And this is
Yeah.
you have plenty of incredible experiences across the board. And so I'm going to ask one more question as it relates to this one
Yeah.
before we continue on. But as it relates to being around the president and him obviously being a human and obviously having his own flaws in a lot of ways, but also at the same time trying to probably provide a lot of comedic relief to the individual. He's the most powerful person in the world. You arguably would be the second most powerful, considering your hand is directly attached to the nuclear codes. I'd just be curious to know what that feels like between two humans at the end of the day, when you have that level of respect for somebody else, and uh, and discipline and connection. There's a human relationship there and a human connection that I feel like a lot of people will never understand. The amount of stress that you go through when you're holding on to the nuclear codes. So, was there ever a moment where this might be a lot of questions packed into one? Was there ever a moment where the president was uh, just provided a lot of comedic relief to you directly, considering he
Oh,
knew the amount
yes.
of weight that was on your shoulders?
Oh, yes. I actually have a little book that I kept. I wasn't an everyday thing, but I've got lots of jokes he told us, stories he told us. He was an incredible storyteller.
Right.
And his sense of timing. Just go listen to his speeches and look at the his sense of timing and telling jokes and things. He was a master. Well, he was a trained actor,
Right.
but he also was just a genuine guy, and I will tell you, I never heard him say a word worse than darn. I mean, he was so classy and he just treated us with so much respect. The day of his funeral, I'll tell you this, the day of his funeral, Mrs. Reagan's chief of staff had asked me to find all of us. There were 19 of us that served him over the 8 years. And in 3 days, I found 18 of the 19 to invite us to the ceremony at the National Cathedral. And of course, five of us who were all together in the fall of 84 reelection campaign, all five of us were together that day. And three of us were wearing our uniforms. I was still an Air Force reservist. I think I was a one star at the time. It was 2004. Anyway, and it was a kind of you just seen the boss carried out, and Mrs. Reagan, the first family, Lady Thatcher had done this unbelievable taped eulogy, and Prince Charles. Anyway, and so in the whole atmosphere outside, it was almost like a misty rain, like Washington was, crying or something for the deceased president.
Right.
And so we're walking away, and one of the president's most trusted advisors, who is still alive today, Mr. Ed Meese, one of the closest guys to the president, sees us. And he literally runs over to us and he says, the president always loved you guys. And
Wow.
I almost lost it. I got to tell you, you've just seen him carried out. You just love him. You miss him. And then when one of his closest advisors said, the president always loved you guys. And it just reinforced the feeling that we had because he respected us. We clearly loved him. And it was just an amazing relationship, particularly at the ranch. He'd just pop into the trailer, the doctor and I in, and after a ride, have a glass of water and tell jokes and tell stories and Hollywood stories. And so I've got a number of those written down, but um, I've actually written a book about all this, but it's just for my kids. So
Wow. Well, I'm sure the stories are endless, and so we could
they
probably make
are.
hours and hours and hours of that particular part of the conversation. I appreciate you sharing it too, and I just when I think about connecting with a president who in a very stressful environment like that, you probably get really close to those other individuals and those other
He
military.
made it easy. He
Yeah.
really made it easy. I will tell you, there were some people in the West Wing that made it hard, but that's okay. But the president was just absolutely wonderful. And I actually was the guy who took him to surgery for a colon cancer. We didn't know he had cancer till we'd done a colonoscopy, and so I actually had to pass the football responsibilities to the vice president. And but like I said, he took that just like he when he got shot and said, looked up at the surgeon, said, "I hope you're all Republicans," and but it comes out in the movie. I think Quaid, picked it up pretty well.
Speaking of which, I guess that is technically a better question. He had things thrown at him. He was shot. There's a lot that happened while he was president. Were can you talk about it? Were you there for any of those experiences during those 2 years?
No, the Army aide, that was in early 81, right after
Okay.
his inauguration, actually. And the Army aide was there during the shooting, and every person around him got shot. Brady, Officer Delahanty. It's amazing when you look at this photo and you see this young Army major down on his knee with the football and his hat in his hand. And but that gentleman is still alive today. And you talk about stories. It's a
Wild.
Colonel Jose Marati. He's just terrific, and but he has stories, and but I think all of us we've gotten together a couple of times. As a matter
Mm.
of fact, I'll share a video link on YouTube with you. It's
Okay.
called Reagan Unclassified. It's a tape, about a 2.5 hour tape of nothing but stories that we shared at the Reagan Ranch uh, Museum, which is in downtown Santa Barbara. The ranch is still there. It's been purchased. It's just like it was in 1986
Right.
by the Young America's Foundation, and God bless them. And there's a museum downtown. And in 2016, six of us went out there, and we went up and visited the ranch. The next day, we went to the library, which is an hour away, for his birthday, laid a wreath on his grave, and then went back that night and we taped. And once you get past the first 15 minutes of a local TV personality telling jokes, you get to the some of the coolest stories. So I'll actually share that with you. I didn't think about doing it ahead of time, but
No,
there's some great story. There's some great stories in there.
love it. I'm looking forward to watching. We kind of mentioned this before too. We talk about service to country and service to certain individuals, and a president like that you just appreciated being around, and respected so dearly. I think about like not getting into politics at all. It's good to know that you're serving not only a great country but also a great individual, and able to provide that level of service during that time in our country's history, and to kind of think about the stories and the experiences that come from that. It's a once in a lifetime sort of experience. Very few
Yeah.
people will ever be able to talk about these things, and it's once again it's an honor to be able to have this conversation with you today, just to learn more about what it was like, and just to continue to tell those stories accordingly about our country's past as well.
Yeah. I think history has treated him very well at the time and during his second administration. He took a lot of beatings, and but I think in the long run he will go down as one of our greatest presidents. And but I'm just telling your audience, he was just a real human being. He didn't take himself seriously,
Yeah.
and he treated everyone with respect. He was like I said, I never heard him get mad and berate anybody. I mean, he was a real leader.
Right. Love it. Love it. The football too. How big was the football at that time? And I'm not sure if you can talk about dimensions, what it looked like, that sort of thing. I mean, we can all kind of see it on TV, right? We know there's somebody carrying it, but was it
It-
much bigger than what it is nowadays?
no,
Okay.
no, no. It's probably about the same size,
Okay.
and people call it the emergency satchel.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it picked up this term, the football, but yeah, it's with you all the time, and it's I could tell you some funny stories about people, particularly movie stars and stuff, who would see it
Okay.
and be so intimidated by it. It was really, and you just go, it's just a bag, just don't worry about it. It's not going to explode,
Yeah.
it's not, emit any toxic fume, but yeah, they're, you know,
Was there a particular
they
movie star that you were thinking about?
well, there's one the night of he won re-election. We were walking around the Century City Plaza Hotel, and the first family. Of course, we're always in kitchens and back. We're all slipping in and slipping out. And so the president and the first lady had just gone into this big ballroom with a bunch of folks, and so the doctor and I were just kind of chilling with some agents and nurse and communicators and stuff, and so I had it because it was actually tethered to your wrist. I had a piece of so we're just standing in a back kind of hallway waiting. The first family pops into this the group of donors and this group of celebrators and everything else. And so I'm sitting there and I'm just kind of leaning against the back of the wall and the football's down between my legs. And the next thing I see is Charlton Heston and a very attractive blonde sprinting. They're obviously late to get into the event. And they go past me, and all of a sudden he pulls her back right in front of me. And Heston looks down and points his finger, and he asks his wife, I guess it is, "Do you know what that is?" And of course, I'm getting really self-conscious because they're pointing down between my legs. And I'm going like this. And she goes, what are you talking about? He goes, that's the football. She goes, it's a briefcase. He goes, no, it's the football. She says, it's a briefcase, you dummy, or something like that. And then finally goes, never mind. I'll explain it to you later. And so he rushes into where the first family is. And so I turned to the doctor and I said, see, Moses thinks I'm bad. So, and from the Ten Commandments. And
Yeah.
so, but he literally kept pointing, and I really was hoping my fly wasn't open or something. But he kept pointing down. He said, "Do you know what that is? Do you know what that is?" And she's going, "It's a briefcase." No, he said, "It's a football." She's going, "It's a briefcase." It was hilarious, and
Uh,
but yeah,
that's great. That's
you had to be
great.
prepared for just about anything.
Got to be prepared. Make sure your fly's up too, I guess, at all times.
Yeah.
You never know. You never know. So you were not during this 2 year stint as military aide. Were you flying at all still during that time? Did you fly
No, you
ever
didn't
during
have
that?
time.
Okay.
Matter of fact, when we first got there were only four of us. And during that campaign, we were spending 70% of the time away from our own beds, doing advance work, traveling, nights in the White House and stuff like that. And so we were so busy, we at one point said, hey, has there ever been a Coast Guard aide to the president? Because we need help. And and we found out there had been. So we went out and hired a young lady who was flying uh, Gulfstreams for the Secretary of Transportation. That's back when the Coast Guard was under DOT. And
Right.
she came and joined us. And so she was the first female aide. The president loved her and she fit right in. And so that made five. And now they've added a Space Force. So they have six.
Got it.
And so, but, and now it's a lot easier because you have more resources.
Right.
But yeah, we were spending a lot of time on the road.
Got it. So before this, so leading up to this time, you served in a number of different roles. So national security advisor, though, came prior to, correct?
After,
That came
after.
afterwards. Okay.
Well, I separated, and it's a very unusual thing. There's never been a military aide to the president who actually separated from their parent service after that job. I mean, because you've got a job where your fitness reports are being signed by the president of the United
Right.
States.
Right.
And so, people, expect you to go on and become a very, very senior officer, and many did. Um, but I had been doing my graduate work at Georgetown on national security, and I just was interested in getting into a policy role. Um, I've been part of a couple of operations in my early career that didn't go well, special operations type things. And so I made a very difficult decision to separate, go to the Air Force Reserve. And the only job I had is I was going to go be an instructor out at Andrews. Um, and luckily, about a month later, I heard that Senator Dole, the majority leader, wanted to hire somebody to do his defense issues who had genuine real world military experience.
Right.
And I got an interview and did did some writing samples and things like that. But I got hired by the majority leader, and he was an amazing guy as well.
Wonderful. And your obviously the world's transformed a lot since that time. But what were some of your major focuses during that period as it relates to, um, uh, I guess more so, what parts of the world were you mainly focused on? Because we've talked about
Well,
China a little bit,
yeah.
but was that as much of a concern at that time, or
Well, not really.
okay,
We basically had three of us. We call the Dole Security Council,
yep,
and so we had a guy who was principally doing foreign policy. I was principally doing defense, and then we had an arms control guy we hired because I hated doing arms control, and it was such a big issue at the time with SDI, the
yep,
Strategic Defense Initiative, and the interpretation of the ABM treaty. So there were actually three of us, and at any given time when an issue would pop up, we'd go, okay, who has a background on this? Like, for instance, we had several Middle East issues, which you would consider foreign policy, but our foreign policy guy was an Asia guy. He didn't know, he had never spent much time in the Middle East. So I would do those issues,
got it.
and then, but we would just divide them up amongst ourselves, who will do specific issues. But primarily, I did defense issues and, of course, veterans. because, Senator Dole is the most highly visible disabled World War II veteran in Washington. And he hid his disability very well, but he had no use of his right arm. And but he was just he's an amazing guy. But the majority leader is almost like being president.
Right.
It's like I'm going to do 10 minutes on this, I'm going to do 30 minutes on that. I got in an hour I've got to go do CNN. I've got to go do this. And so you always had to be prepared. And he almost had a photographic memory. He had gone and finished college and gone to law school with this disability and he couldn't write. And so I always tell people, I think he had developed some ability to use more of his brain than everybody else. But you had to be careful what you told Senator Dole, because even though you wouldn't think he was listening, 6 months later, he'd come right out of his mouth, go, wow, Tom, said, yeah. You're
Yeah.
going, holy moly, you got to. But he was a great American. Unfortunately, that fall we lost the majority and went to the minority, which was quite frankly easier in the Senate. But it was when I went to the Senate, I knew the issues, I knew the people, but there's a rhythm in the Senate that you really have to learn, and you can't learn it until you get there. And so for the first 5, 6 months, I was like almost over my head. And thank goodness my fellow staffers were very, very helpful, because when you have a defense authorization bill on the floor of the Senate for 2 weeks and you're working till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning doing amendments, I mean, it's a different world.
Right.
And unfortunately, these days, they don't seem to get these important bills on the floor. But back to your question about the issues, there were just some really big issues. And one of my biggest issues at the time was the well, I got a lot of feedback, was the special operations legislation that created SOCOM, because the Eagle Claw into Iran in April of 80 had blown up at Desert One, and I had a hand in that. I wasn't at Desert One, but I had other pieces of it. And then Grenada the first day, going in Grenada the first day, which was exciting. And so a lot of people looked at those two things and said, we've got to do better. And when I got up there and the Armed Services Committee was working on this, I said, by the way, I was part of both of those things. And they're going, you got to be kidding me. And so today, operations like that we can do very quickly
Right.
because of Special Operations Command and the mistakes that we made during those two things. But that was one thing. And like I said, at the time I was doing the ABM treaty stuff until we got the new guy hired. But the SDI, the B2 was starting, the Advanced Technology Bomber. There were always tough votes, people trying to kill them,
Right.
particularly SDI. And but so a lot of good stuff came out of that. And now, of course, the president wants to do a golden dome type thing or something. There's still a lot of good ideas of how to do that stuff, because people don't realize it. But Cameron, we only have about 40, low 40s, 41, 44 anti-ballistic missiles up in Alaska. And then I think we have a few down in California to protect Vandenberg Air Force Base. But
And
we
if
don't,
my research serves me correct, they're not 100% accurate either, are they?
well, you talk about a bullet hitting a bullet out of the
Yeah.
atmosphere,
Yeah.
and so we you know the Russians have a great deal of anti-ballistic missile protection, and for many, many years we had none,
Right.
zero. And
Did
people
you
thought we did.
when you were so you were the time period though, the Soviet Union had not collapsed just yet. You had started it and then it collapsed
Right.
while you were in this position, correct?
Right. Yeah,
So a
I
lot of
took
you,
I took I took President Reagan to Geneva in November of 85. That was the first time to meet Gorbachev.
wow.
And that was the beginning of the relationship
Right.
with Gorbachev. But when you watch the movie and you see how many of their leaders died over about 5 or 6 year period. They had like 3 or 4 die in a row. And so you kind of go, who are you going to develop a relationship with? But
Right.
yeah, the Soviet Union, I mean, the president he knew who the bad guys were.
Right. Right.
And so I think he had a great deal to do with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And of course, we've got a situation right now where you've got a leader over there who wants to put the band back together.
Right.
Yeah.
I
So,
actually, one of my college experience, I studied in Estonia for a month in college, and that was one of my key introductions to just like better understanding the Soviet Union and what obviously the remnants of the Soviet Union in Estonia and in the Baltics. And so it was really really interesting to be over there and to and just to feel what it would have been like, and to be around people who literally lived during that era in that
mhm.
location, and to start
Yeah.
having those conversations. And you go to a small Riga, like a small border town with Russia, and it would be 90% Russian still, right? So it's still
Yeah.
very much so Russian. I think a lot of people, when they think about this conflict too, they're like, oh, it's 100% that kind of. Well, there's a huge Russian influence still in these locations,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it makes the dynamics
Yeah.
super complex across the
Well,
board.
and you look today, my wife and I just finished a 20-day cruise in the Mediterranean on a small cruise boat, very small. But, to go to Albania and pull into the harbor out in Albania and look at how depressing, but they're coming back. The good news
Yep.
is they're free now, but just to even look at the buildings and then the next day be in Montenegro
Yeah.
and you just go, oh my gosh. And
Yep.
they're like right next to one another, but it's just so communist looking. All
Yep.
the buildings look alike and everything else. But thank goodness, most of these countries are free now,
Right.
and that's one of the reasons we've got to take a stand, and NATO's got to take a stand against what's going on in the world, because China, Russia, and India Iran are basically trying to change the international world order to their advantage.
Right.
That's what they're doing,
Right.
and we can't obviously permit that to happen because they don't have the same type of values that we have.
You may see this as a very clear answer, but I see it as a little bit more complex just from the history that I've learned, right? And what we're experiencing nowadays. But it seems as though for a long time we kind of knew who our enemy was. Nowadays we know who our enemy is, but it also feels like we're being attacked from every angle to a certain
Right.
degree. Maybe that's always been the case, but it seems as though nowadays, with the more research that like we do and the more information we have, we're like, well, is everybody against us now? Are we all attacking each other from different angles? It seems it's just not a clear and simple, that's our enemy, we're going to
Well,
attack.
you're right. You're right. That's the way it was. The Soviet Union was the enemy. China wasn't nearly as strong.
Yep.
And Iran, of course, Iran has been a problem since the embassy fell there in '79.
Right.
I just made a speech Saturday night at the Air Force Ball where I talked about the Beirut bombing in October 1983. 241 Marines and Navy corpsmen and a couple of soldiers, I think. 241 of our troops were killed in a single blast.
Wow.
They were in a high-rise barracks type thing. They were over there for peacekeeping duty. And this was all done by terrorists funded by Iran. And we've been in this fight since then. And it just keeps on going. And so, literally, the Russians and the Chinese, with their collaboration right now, they see an opening, that they're going to try to take advantage of and we just can't permit it because we don't want them, running the planet. And if you read a DoD report that came out last December, that they're basically lying. It was a China report, says China wants to be the preeminent economic and military power by 2049.
Right.
That's their objective, and they clearly are moving towards that. Uh, and so we'll see. But they are all collaborating against us right now because they think we're vulnerable. And of course, um, that's what deterrence is all about. If you show deterrence, like the strike on the nuclear facilities in Iran, boy, did that get everybody's attention.
Right.
And what an amazing um, mission that was, but people don't realize our kids have been practicing that mission for 15 years, and they were ready. And that was truly amazing. And that made, a lot of people in the world scratch their head going, well, if they could do it to Iran, they could probably do it to me too. And we could.
It made
And
me think when like the Top Gun movie came out too, when they showed the precision bombing over the mountain as well. I was like, is this in a way showing capabilities and expressing to the world that we will do it if we need to? It's kind of one of those subconscious thoughts of sorts. It's like
yeah,
maybe we're presenting this early just to be like, hey, we're still here in a lot of different ways, but we want to make sure it's very clear that we can precision strike at any time and any place in the world.
well, and the interesting thing about that, and that was a lot of Hollywood,
Yeah, lots of Hollywood.
that if it's in your geopolitical strategic interest to do something like that, which it was to the strike in Iran, the president has to make that decision. And the irony is, a lot of people don't probably didn't catch this, but they're bombing a country that had F-14 Tomcats, and you go, really? Well, interesting enough, Iran is the only country in the Middle East that bought F-14s,
Right.
and they evidently still have some. I don't know how flyable they are, but there are still F-4s and F-14s in Iran. So it was sort of a kind of an Iran type scenario. Um, but to have them go jump into an F-14, it's really that was I mean it was a well done movie. I have to hand it to them, but they were stretching a lot of imagination to get a lot of that done.
Lots of views, typical Hollywood. Great.
It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. And I'm
So
glad they did it. It's very, pro-military. It's very patriotic. Um, and Tom Cruise is even richer than he was. So
he just keeps going and he just keeps
yeah.
going. You mentioned DoD report regarding the 2049 plan with China, and this is something I've actually talked about on previous podcasts with individuals that worked in government capacities before. We constantly or consistently talk about China's future plans, and they're not shy about it either. It's not like
Mm,
this is something they hold back. This is a very
right.
clear strategic plan of theirs, and they're very open about it. So with the rest of the country, we constantly talk about how China is obviously the opponent here, but China also at this point is very quiet in a lot of ways. International, they're loud their own ways, but as it relates to what we see, they seem very quiet and almost on purpose. So I guess as it relates to the 2049 plan, can you provide maybe a little more insight into what that looks like um,
Mm.
for China moving forward?
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is once Xi came into power, he did some brilliant stuff. I have to hand it to him. The Belt and Road Initiative that they have created to reestablish what they call the Silk Road, the famous trade routes and everything. But basically, they have taken the profits from the money they make on us because of our imports from them, and they have spread this money all around the world. Everywhere where you have strategic minerals, you have oil and gas, you have a strategic location, you are going to find the Belt and Road Initiative. Whether it's a railroad they're building through Kenya, whether they're building hospitals and uh, performing arts centers in Port of Spain, Trinidad, just a few miles off the coast of Venezuela. I mean, and they're taking over, they've built all these utility facilities in Africa. And the interesting thing is they very rarely ever employ locals. They do it all themselves. And of course, they loan the money to a lot of these countries. When these countries can't pay them back, they take this stuff over.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I have to hand it to them. But it gives them so much influence in the international community. And so then that translates into international organizations like the UN. People don't realize there's like 190 international organizations, and the U.S. government spends over $21 billion a year in these organizations. Now, President Trump has started questioning some of that, And you're going to see some of that at the UN probably this week in action, because are we getting our bang for the buck? But I have to hand it to the Chinese. They have such influence around the country, even just loaning countries money. I had
Right.
countries come up to me at my assignment in Montreal at the International Civil Aviation Organization, and they would say, Mr. Ambassador, we're really with you. I personally support you, but our country has a lot of loans with the Chinese, and they have, demarched, what they call sent a message to their consulate there that they can't support something that the U.S. was going to support. So like I said, I have to hand it to them. That was what they did, and then Xi also decided he wanted to start taking over certain key strategic international organizations. And the first big one was the International Telecommunications Union. And this organization goes back to like the 1860s, 1870s. Um, but when you think about where can they spread Huawei, their communications network and everything. So they took over the ITU, they were basically beginning to run the International Civil Aviation Organization. Then they took over FAO, Food and Agriculture. So, Lloyd, so you're going to be in charge of agricultural policy. So we could see them, gaining more and more influence. And that's when the first Trump administration said, we're going to have to do something about this.
Right.
Believe it or not, then they tried to run one of their vice premiers for an organization called WIPO. And I tell audiences that it's the World Intellectual Property Organization.
Yeah.
And so that was just something we had to draw the line in the sand. But like I said, I got to hand it to them. They had a plan, they were executing it. And today they're still pretty much executing that and
Right.
building up. They're building nuclear weapons so fast. It's I think they'll have 500 nuclear weapons by 2030 or something. They're building missile silos and intercontinental ballistic things that we have had that people say, well, no, those are useless, but they're building them,
Yeah.
and they had a bigger Air Force, a bigger Navy. Now they can't really project those forces out a lot like we can, but they will get that capability. They
Well,
will get that.
I've heard constantly about their building capacity with their naval vessels specifically, just outnumbers us dramatically. So I think it's when if and when you get into wartime, your ability to build is obviously key. Your ability to build your infrastructure to build vessels is key. So is that something that's, I mean, obviously our tech to a certain degree in certain areas may be more advanced, but they're edging up dramatically. So
Well,
is
at
this
some point, quantity trumps quality.
right?
Keep saying, yeah, we got quality, and we've got our great submarines. I think the only thing they really fear are submarines. They don't fear our aircraft carriers. They've been building these hypersonic missiles, and they're carrier killers. Is what they are.
Right.
Unfortunately, now we're developing defenses for that kind of stuff. But I've had people basically tell me, if something breaks out there between Taiwan and everything on the surface is going to get sunk.
Right.
And it doesn't surprise me that some people would say that. I'm not a naval strategist. People go, yeah, anything's on the surface is going down. Yeah, they're all targets.
Right. Right.
But it's pretty scary atmosphere out there. And I've told a couple audiences recently, I've never in my entire career seen a more unstable international security environment ever than what we have right now. Very scary.
Very scary. Very scary. On your international aviation experiences between 2017 and 2020, a lot happened during that period of time. But I think one of the biggest things when I think of aviation, I think of like drone warfare nowadays specifically. I'm curious to know how much you still discuss and or discussed drones during that period of time. Because
Right. Well, believe it or not, they had not emerged that much. And I mean, we are the International Civil Aviation Organization, not military. So military vehicles are considered national
Yep.
assets. Um, but believe it or not, we did not have that much. It was just starting to emerge. But always the fascinating thing that, and then the issue starts bubbling up. And of course, the folks, and we call it ICAO, the acronym is ICAO, but
Yep.
ICAO. And when all that merging, what is the first thing the staff do? They go, well, what does the FAA think about this?
Yeah.
And so we would bring FAA experts because, we're basically considered the gold standard. Um, ICAO sets all the standards for safety and security for all international aviation. But unfortunately, those standards have to be pretty low because 193 countries have signed up to meet those
Right.
obligations. So, for instance, for somebody, I think the ICAO standard to get hired into the right seat of an airliner is like 250 hours. And we had that standard for a number of years until a famous accident in 2009 up in Buffalo, New York. But ours is now 1,500 hours and an air transport pilot rating. So I always tell people, you know, our aviation system is extremely safe in my book because our FAA and our TSA are the best on the planet. Now, people in Europe will say, well, we have a really good, so yeah, you do. But until that accident up at Washington National, it had been 15 years or so, 16 years since we had had an aircraft accident. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
I was reading an article, I think the chance of dying in an aircraft accident is 1 in 85 million. Our folks are well trained. They go to simulators every 6 months.
Right.
You know, they lose an engine on takeoff at max gross weight and have to fly it off and come back in and fly a single engine approach. I mean, they're well trained. They just have to keep their situational awareness. And but a lot of these international carriers are using, 250 hours, and you put somebody in a pretty sophisticated jet with only 250, 300, 400 hours, you know, you have the potential of bad things happening. And there are accidents. A lot of it is in what I call the non-free world, but they just don't have the standards we do. But the standards are set at ICAO, and every country is supposed to meet them. And so the debate is always, how high, how low should they be? But our standards, I want to assure all your listeners, our standards are much higher than all these other countries.
Right.
And that's why our system, I think, is so safe. And I have absolutely no, although I am a terrible passenger. I've got 10,000 flying hours. I sit there and I feel everything they're doing, every flat movement there, and everything. A lot of times I'm sitting there going, okay, what are these clowns doing in the cockpit now? And but I've been up there and I have confidence in them. I really do.
Well, for me, ignorance is almost bliss to a certain degree. There was a period of time where I had a lot of anxiety flying and have since gotten over that. But I think it's a good thing that I don't know exactly what's going on at all times because I'd probably be thinking about it exactly like you are. You're a
Yeah,
backseat driver, to say the least.
well, I mean, most of these flights are on autopilot from, a couple thousand feet above the ground to a couple thousand feet above the ground on a descent.
Right.
Once you manually take off, and then once everything's, cleaned up and you connect the autopilot and you're flying with the autopilot because the autopilot can fly the airplane more smoothly than the pilot can. And then the same thing on the descent. Typically, you do the descent on autopilot until a couple thousand feet. Now these airplanes will land themselves on special runways, but typically the pilots up front have so much pride in their craft that they'll let it fly down to a couple thousand, and then they'll manually fly and control it.
Yep.
And there's always a lot of competition about who has the best landings. So.
I'm
So
sure.
that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing. It's good to take pride in your work, especially when you're flying a large craft with hundreds of people on board. So,
Yeah, I mean, you go in and out of these hubs, Cameron, you can have 180, 90 people on 6 flights in a day or something.
yeah.
Think of that responsibility. So I have no qualms paying these people really good salaries because the other part is they have to have a physical, like a captain has to have the category 1 physical, and they have a physical every 6 months.
Yeah.
Every 6 months they have a physical, and they have a live EKG done. I mean, that's why you don't hear about a lot of people dying in cockpits, is because it's a pretty healthy group, and you have to maintain your health to pass these physicals.
Is that just the U.S. or that's the international standard?
That's U.S.
Got it. Got it.
U.S.
What is the standard? I mean, is it pretty is it completely different in other countries or is it pretty
I don't
similar?
know. I've never
Okay.
had a physical in a foreign
Okay.
country. I would imagine it's very similar.
Yeah. Lots of
But
lots of copying or benchmarking, I guess.
yeah, I mean, people, I think one of the funniest things that ever happened to me was I was at ICAO. I'd only been there a couple of weeks, and I took a trip to China, to Beijing. And of course, I was a little apprehensive, but the thing about my agency, ICAO, is a very collegial agency, because I would constantly say, we're here for one reason, and that's to make sure there's a landing for every takeoff. That's why we're here, a landing for every takeoff, safety and security. And so I'm on this trip to Beijing, and I had a trip to go to one of their air traffic control facilities. So I go out there, and I'm getting the tour and everything, and then we went into this conference room, and of course here are the Chinese leadership of this organization, and they look like men in black. They all got dark suits and dark white shirts and dark tie. It was really cute, and they were all very stoic until we went around the room, and when I introduced myself as the U.S. ambassador, they suddenly got friendly. Then they started smiling and goes, "Oh, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for coming." I'm going, "Okay." And they go, "Oh, yeah, we trained with your FAA." I'm going, "You did?" "Oh, yes. And we just take your manuals and your regulations and interpret them into in Mandarin, So we love you guys." And I'm just going, this was not what I expected. And but our FAA has trained a lot of those people, because we want their system to be as safe as ours.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I thought they were going to kiss me on the lips. Oh, we love you guys. We love your FAA. I'm going, what? And but it was cute, and they were so nice to me the rest of the day when they realized I was the U.S. ambassador.
I guess there are certain things that you do like other countries to steal and to take, right? For the safety of everyone
We
involved.
want everybody to be safe.
Right.
Landing for every takeoff.
Right. Absolutely.
So
So I want to leave us some time for the Red Cross. There's plenty of different things we could discuss across the board from your service and experiences. And I appreciate all the stories up to this point, but I want to be very respectful of your time.
yeah,
Uh, the Red Cross and the work that you're doing in the Low Country, can we just kick that
yeah,
off?
absolutely. And I hope anyone who listens to your podcast hopefully will realize what the Red Cross does on a day-to-day basis. Um, Besides blood collection and saving lives, we have all these humanitarian missions that are nearly invisible, not the least of which was every day, almost every day, we respond to a home fire here in the Low Country, anywhere from Georgetown down to Savannah. And what happens is when there's a home fire and it's bad enough, the fire departments call our disaster assistance teams who are on 24/7, and they race over to the fire. And I really had never thought about the consequences of this, but I was talking to a fireman about a year ago, and he says, "Oh, you guys are King Kong." He said, "You know, we put the fire out, and we need to get back to the station, clean our equipment, and everything." He said, "And these victims, you feel so sorry for them, and they're hanging all over us, and you're trying to leave, but you feel so sorry." He said, "But then you guys at the Red Cross show up." He goes, "Hey, look, it's the Red Cross." And we will help people with a debit card to go get a hotel room, go feed your family, go get a hotel room. What have you lost? Your meds, your phones, your chargers. We'll open cases to support them. And that's just one thing. Of course, obviously the hurricane, we're in hurricane season. But to tell you that when Helene came into the Florida and went all the way up through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina,
Right.
I did Channel 2 4 days after that. We had 2,200 volunteers supporting 209 shelters.
Wow.
It was incredible, all the way from Florida all the way to North Carolina. 2,200 volunteers, 209 shelters. And so that's one of the most amazing things we do. And then the service to the armed forces, um, every day we're helping some young airman, sailor, coastie, whatever. If there's a family emergency, a father's had a heart attack or something like that, and they don't have the resources, we help them do the coordination to get home, and actually we finance a lot of that stuff. And so our humanitarian missions every day are just amazingly important. And a significant part of those missions are funded by the revenue generated by blood. And so that's why I ask people, look up, go to redcrossblood.org, find a drive, you put your zip code in, it'll show you we have 2 to 3 to 4 drives every day somewhere in the low country that you could sign up for. And so when you're supporting the Red Cross blood drives, you're doing two things. You're saving lives and you're supporting the community. We have some competitors here who are basically paying people for their blood now. They are not public service organizations. They'll tell you they are, but they are not. And so we're in this community every day helping people. And just as an example, MUSC here uses 50,000 pints of Red Cross blood a year.
Wow.
Their network, 50,000 pints of Red Cross blood. And so I just ask people, we can probably do a $10 debit card to Amazon. We're doing Snoopy t-shirts right now, which are really, really cool. And a lot of people like Snoopy t-shirts. But, that's about what we can do. But just realize that we're plowing those resources back into the humanitarian mission. And I just can't emphasize that enough. And, if your house burned, you would understand it. And of course, a lot of this stuff happens in lower income neighborhoods and things like that. And so, these people are really hurting when some of these things happen, but we're always there and
Right.
we're always going to be there. And that's why I just plead for people, redcrossblood.org, and find a drive, donate, find a drive. And it's not hard to do. And, the sad part, Cameron, actually, when I'm talking to audiences, you'd be shocked how many people don't even know their blood types. Uh, if you're rushed to the only level one trauma center in the low country, that's the MUSC, and you don't know your blood type, we're going to have to use O type blood on you. So it really would be good if you or your spouse or your significant other knew your blood type so you wouldn't have to waste those valuable O's.
Right.
But if you come donate to us, we're going to send you an email. It's a free blood test, basically. We're going to tell you what your blood type is. And actually, if you download our app, Red Cross Blood Donor app, we're going to tell you where we use your blood, which I think is one of the coolest things, a blood journey to tell you where on God's green earth we use your blood. And it's usually somewhere in the Southeast. It's not necessarily South Carolina because we provide 40% of the blood in the country. But
Wow.
I just ask people to think about it. Only 62% of the population is eligible to give. And when I tell people that, they go, that's terrible. It's diseases, meds you're taking it. I said, no, that's the good news. Only 3% give. That's the bad news. And so, just as late as Saturday night, I was talking at the Air Force Ball. I did a shout out to the medical folks on the Air Force Base who run blood drives. But I always end with the mere fact that the life you save may be your own.
Right.
And so, I'm a blood donor. I do it when I can. You can give a whole blood every 56 days, basically every 2 months. I don't say you have to need to do that, but just, go out there 2 or 3 times a year, find a blood drive. I'm not the crazy, I'm not big on needles either. And I tell people, I've broken the sound barrier. I've flown jets in combat zones. I could no more stick a needle in anybody than the man in the moon. And I just really admire these young ladies, mostly I have few young men, the talent to do this. And so it's not something I could do. I can do crazy stuff but that's not, I just admire them so much, and they're saving lives every day.
Well, so giving blood is one way. They can also volunteer for like disaster relief as well too, because there's a number of
Absolutely.
different ways to get involved.
No, we need shelter volunteers right now. You can go online and at redcross.org rather than redcrossblood.org, redcross.org and volunteer. I was just out last week. We had some volunteers training. We just had a shelter boot camp down at the Citadel. God bless those kids. During their first football game, a number of them, volunteered to go to our shelter boot camp. And the Citadel cadets have done a wonderful job over the years supporting us and I know you're a grad, right?
I am.
And they have done a marvelous job over the years of supporting us during hurricanes. And we were at the Krause Leadership and Ethics Center, and they were showing us pictures of past uh, emergencies and crises things when the cadets were out there and our t-shirts and stuff. So I can't say enough about that school, your alma mater, and what they do to support the Red Cross. And just so you know, last week, in one day, we collected 133 pints of blood
That's awesome.
from those cadets.
That's awesome. I
And,
don't think we
and
realized at the time because I've given a blood a number of times at school. And I think we kind of briefly mentioned that in our past conversation. But I don't think we realized at the time the amount of the impact that it does have right across the board
I
and the
can't I can't tell
number
you
of
how many
lives that were
lives I can
saved.
save. You can't even calculate,
Right.
because when you do a power red, it's called, which is a double dose of red blood cells, you could save up to 6 lives with that one donation.
Wow.
And so, what those kids are doing now, you and I know they're showing up because they want to get the nights off,
Yep.
but that's okay. And I talk to a lot of them and go, this is why this is so important. And you should do this because it's actually a very healthy thing to do to regenerate the blood in your system. And so I told them, I said, and we had a lot of first time donors and they were a little, you could see it on their face. And so you go over and you talk to them, say, this is going to be fine and everything else. But I could not be more proud of the Citadel's impact on the Red Cross. And then, of course, volunteers are always welcome. We'll train you up, but we'll be there in a crisis. But yes, please donate, please volunteer. We have a big sickle cell event this Thursday night. We're raising money for a sickle cell initiative um, downtown at the African American Museum. It's going to be a huge event because people don't realize how much sickle cell patients suffer, and so we need blood from that community and always. And I mean, you're really saving some people's lives. You really are.
I love it. I love it. I I've got a million other questions, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, about your past experiences, what it was like in combat zones, flying as much as you've flown, and hopefully at some point in the future, once I have an in-person location, we'll be able to do this in person and continue the
Right.
conversation. I'd love to do just that, but I will leave us tonight. Well, I'll ask one more question, and I think this is as it relates to everything that's gone on this past week in our country, the past couple of weeks, and kind of just the feeling that a lot of us are feeling as it relates to current events. A lot of young people, a lot of folks that I talk to don't really know the direction of things. We don't really know where things are going, and nobody ever really
Mhm.
does know where things are going. But I think there's kind of a void here and a need or a desire to get involved and to support the country or to help the country in some way. But a lot of young folks don't know how. They don't know the best way to go
Right.
about doing that. So with all of your service to our country in so many different capacities, what would you suggest? What would maybe be your message to younger individuals, younger folks that want to get involved? They want to do something bigger. They want to be a part of something greater than themselves, and they're maybe missing that purpose right now. But they're
Right.
looking to get involved and to provide some kind of service to the country,
Listen, I
just the
tell you
world
what,
in general.
that is a terrific, terrific question. And I wish more people your age, were that introspective. But I would just say public service. A lot of people don't want to consider public service these days, whether it's the military, whether it's civil service, whether it's Peace Corps, whether it's foreign service. But I tell particularly a lot of kids, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot when I was 10 years old. It's just something I my uncle took me on an airplane. I said, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I want to do this." I was lucky, and I got lucky to even get to do it. I wanted to be a pilot. But I always tell people there's so many opportunities, like even just the Red Cross, giving blood.
Yeah.
I told a bunch of cadets recently, I said, one of the things that you realize is when you graduate, not all go to the military, but when you go apply for a job, if you were applying for a job to me, and I'm looking at your resume, and down at the bottom says you're a Red Cross blood donor, I'd go, that is public service. That is above and beyond the call. You care about people. You want to save people. You want to support your community. So there's some really simple things you can do, like blood donations, organ or volunteering to go clean up the beaches, help turtle recovery. I
Yeah.
mean, one of my best volunteers at the Red Cross is the commander in chief of turtle rescue on Folly Beach. He just is cool, the
That's
cool
cool.
job.
Yeah.
And there's so many things you can do. But from a government standpoint, like going to a military service or a reserve unit or a guard unit, and because it gives you this breadth of experience that you go, okay, I don't like doing that. I might like doing that. And unless you experience those things and open up your aperture, basically, to the possibilities, you're not going to know what really you want to do. I was so fortunate, because I did this, but then I got interested in national security policy and then, and things. So I used to tell my children, Daddy has three hobbies. He gets paid for them all. And, I love flying airplanes, and doing policy stuff and in the Air Force Reserve and things. I mean, I was just so fortunate. And I fell into a lot of that, but it's also you would get exposed to something and just a little bit and you go, that's really interesting, and then you can go have an impact there.
Right.
But there's a broad range of things you can do from the government standpoint. And I just got to tell you, I am one of the most fortunate people on the planet. And I thank the good Lord every day, for this life he's given me because, I've been rocketed, I've been shot at, I've had IEDs blow up in front of my motor. You know, I am still here. I should not have been. I almost had a midair one night in the middle of the Atlantic at 35,000 feet with a South African 747. We dove under him. I mean, I probably shouldn't still be here, but I am. And so, I just ask the Lord to help me every day, save lives, serve others, just like Jesus asked us to do. And I think this week, seeing I mean, how touching was it that the wife of a young man who was assassinated forgives the shooter? I have never seen anything more classy than that.
Yeah.
It stirred me. And just in the last 24 hours, I will tell you, I've lost somebody very, very dear to me. But last night I called her and one of her children literally held the phone up so she could hear my voice. And she passed away this morning at 3 o'clock. And so, at the age of 97, and someone who's been in my life always, but would always encourage me to do the right things. She was a religious rock for me, and I just, you need to surround yourself with the right folks as well.
Yeah.
But you know how to do that, but get these various experiences and get out there, try this, try that. I told my kids, you don't have to decide immediately after college what you're going to be. You will go a couple years and you'll pivot. And your generation they do that a lot. My youngest daughter, it was one place, and after about 3 or 4 years ago, okay, I'm a little stale. I'm going to go do this and everything else. Y'all are very mobile society, and of course, the online experience we didn't have when I was your age
Right.
allows you to do that, and that's great. But just, use great judgment, have a sincere desire to serve others, And the sky's the limit, Cameron. It really is.
I love it. Well, Ambassador Carter, on that note, I'm going to wrap us up for the night. As mentioned, I do have a number of other questions, and hopefully I'll be able to ask them at some point in the future.
Glad to.
But I really appreciate the insights, the stories, and also just the general service as well. I think there's a lot of folks nowadays too that are, as mentioned, are trying to figure out that way they can serve and get involved in the community. And there's a number of ways just from your experience that they can maybe learn from and then figure out a path that makes the most sense for them. So,
Yeah, no, like I said, I get on my knees every morning and thank the good Lord for another day. And it's just, I want to serve. I did a Red Cross meeting earlier downtown. I think I've got some stuff tomorrow. I mean, I try to do something every day that's going to help somebody.
right.
And that's what I get my greatest sense of reward from.
Love it. Love it.
You bet.
Well,
You
thank you
take
so much for the
care.
time, and we will talk very soon.